My question concerns your prototype book, Primal Male, Primal Female. And what triggered the question is I read several articles not too long ago in a major newspaper where social scientists apparently trying to analyze voting patterns in the United States over something like the last 50 years, looking for distinctive trends. And one of the things they found is that whereas women have continued to vote in approximately equal numbers for conservative and progressive candidates over that time period, men have increasingly tended to vote not just for conservative candidates, but for very conservative candidates that the scientists characterized as sort of alpha male personalities. And the scientists speculated that this represented some kind of a pushback on the part of males, because whether a male was college educated or not, the same pattern was visible, that this appeared to be some kind of a pushback on the part of males, maybe not fully conscious, in response to the increased emancipation of women and the increased participation they've had in the workplace and in the outside world. And so from a primal male, primal female perspective, I was wondering if this rings true, and if so, if men are feeling sort of disadvantaged now with the increased participation of women in the outside world, what advice do you have for us males to feel more comfortable with these trends that have been happening?
Okay. Well, first off, I'll start with saying, no, I don't think that's true. I think the conclusions those social scientists have come to are not, in fact, what's motivating the results that they discovered in their voting patterns. I guess it was a good guess, but you know, if men and women do something differently, then you're looking for a male, female, or a gender reason for it, and that was about the only thing they could come up with. So I don't think that's what it is. I think the answer for why it is that way, and I'd never heard of that research before, but assuming the research is good, which it probably is, it's usually just statistics that they do for finding trends and things, is that there is a lot more fear in our culture than there has been. Much more fearful place than it used to be. And the gender comes into it in that the fear now tends to be in the big increase in fear is in what I call the outside world. Okay, the outside world of stuff and events and happenings, as opposed to the inside world of relationship. The males, they take their dominance and they feel more at home in that outside world. Women are dominant and feel more at home in the inside world of relationship. Okay, so it's kind of a male space in that outside world. And the male space in the outside world has gotten more and more fearful. And because of that, you have people voting for, you know, the strong guy that's going to solve all the problems. They're voting for the, what do we call it, daddy, who can fix everything. It's that sort of thing. So when you feel overwhelmed, there's so much fear, so many terrible things that are possible and about to happen, then, and you feel like you can't control any of it. It's outside your control. But yet there's all this scary stuff out there, but you can't control it, then you look for somebody else who can. And the people that tend to catch your attention are the people who are bigger than life, arrogant, bossy, I'm in charge, kind of, what do we call that? There's a name for that personality.
What, an alpha male?
No, it's not. That's not really true so much just alpha male, but that's part of it. It gets that.
Autocratic?
But yeah, the autocratic is part of it. You know, the person who steps up and wants to be in charge and take care of things for you. So I think it's the fact that there's so much fear going on. People feeling very insecure and impotent in their ability to do anything about it. And it's not that things in this world are any scarier. Actually, they're less scarier. It's just that we are trying to make it as scary as possible. We aren't, but people are trying to make it as scary as possible. So, and the reason for that is that if you know what a person is afraid of, then you know how to manipulate them. You know, if somebody knows your fears, then they can make you dance and sing to any song and any dance they want to. They're easy to manipulate with fear. And that's obvious. If you look at the commercials that are on the tube or that you see someplace, the commercials are all about fear. You know, if you buy this beer, then all the ladies will love you when you get back with your beer at the campsite. You know, you see these pictures, you know, and there's the guy, he gets the wrong kind of beer and everybody kicks sand in his face and pushes him away. But if you bring the right kind of beer, then all the girls in the bikinis come up and want to hug you, you know. And it's obviously, it's really intellectually, it's stupid, but it gets people at emotional levels. And if you feel insecure, then you will spend your money buying that beer rather than some other beer because it makes you seem more socially acceptable. And that's just one thing, and it's just a silly advertisement. But the idea, now that we have mass media, even at the global level, people who would like to manipulate others have found that a great tool. So we have lots and lots of fear going on now that just never existed before. Times are actually better, not worse, as far as scary stuff going on. There's always been scary stuff going on in the world. But you know, I can remember when I was, 6, 7 years old, I had my bicycle, and my parents would say, "Be home before dinner." That's all. I'm off. I might be anywhere, 5, 10 miles away, seeing whomever, doing whatever. Wasn't a problem. Go play, come back before dinner. It was routine in those days for people to leave the keys in their car, to leave their houses unlocked. You know, children are actually allowed to go walk the block down to the playground at the schoolhouse or something and go play. You know, now if they get more than 10 feet away from a parent, there's a problem. Every child has to be looked at every minute of every day. At least some monster comes down and scoops them up and flies away with them. So there's just fear, fear, fear. We got a lot of fear back at a lot of saber rattling before we got into wars with Iraq. And it's still going on now. So when you live in this constant fear mode and people are entertained, but it's not just entertainment. People are focused on scary things. You know, if you have something that's nice, little old lady lives in corner house, hands out milk and cookie to the children after school, and everybody loves her. So, people come from the neighborhood to put a new roof on her house and stuff because she's such a wonderful person. That's not news. Nobody wants to listen to that. But somebody goes berserk in a shopping center and kills 30 people, then wow, that's all over the whole globe, and we'll hear that story 50 times before it goes away. We'll hear it 4 or 5 times a day for 2 or 3 weeks. fear, fear, fear. Yeah, it's, that's why people have been looking toward, I wish I could get the right word, but they're actually looking toward a daddy, a father figure, somebody who knows and has power to fix it for them because they no longer feel capable of fixing it themselves. So that's why it's been that trend. And because the outside world's kind of the outside space, that's why it affects men more than women. Now, if you had a similar amount of fear about the inside world, about relationship, then you'd have the ladies reacting a lot more to it than the men do. So that would be my view about it. Somebody who takes authority, okay, don't worry about it, I'll take care of it for you. They have the authority, they have the power, and all you have to do is what they tell you or what they say, and you'll be all right. So you put yourself back in the child's position, and the authoritarian will take care of it. So I think that's the problem. It's not because men feel pushed by women so much as that men are more frightened. Everybody's more frightened. But this is the outside space, the stuff out there, which is the men's world in general, becoming more of the women's world as we make this transition. But historically, it's been a part of the men's world, and that's what our instincts tell us, that that's the world we're supposed to be in charge of and take care of. So I think that explains that statistic.
Because politics is more, the outside world is more the men's world, so they're more sensitive to it.
Yes.
And they're more fearful about that.
Yeah.
And so they're responding.
They feel more out of control. When it comes to the outside world, the women have always felt out of control. That's not their world. That's not what they control. And they're okay with that. That's not a problem. They don't internalize that as being responsible. You know, they're the protector. They're the ones who are supposed to take charge and protect and take care of their family, and they feel less and less adequate to do that because they live in a scarier and scarier place. So the politicians want to scare us, to get us to manipulate us to vote the way they want us to vote. You know, religion has always been about scaring people in order to get them to believe and think the way they want you to believe. You know, even our legal system is about scaring people with what's going to happen to you if you don't do this or don't do that or do something else. Advertisers, which now carry a lot of weight in people's psyches because they use all the psychological tricks that they can to get to people's decision space, they're trying to use fear to manipulate, you know, what we're going to do. Anybody who has anything to sell is trying to manipulate people. And now we have mass communications that make it easier for these people to successfully manipulate. And we just have to, you know, outgrow that. But I think that's what's going on. And much of the fearful stuff is stuff that we're just creating. It's stuff that we create ourselves. The downside of it is that if you live in a fearful, and you think you live in a very fearful environment that's very scary, that puts you into fear mode, and you will actually create a more scary environment because your intent modifies future probability. So it actually, you know, it's one of those things that you know, comes true because you believe it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. That triggered another question, I can tell.
So the fear thing, a thought on that. I think with the increased amount of fear in the fearful world that we start to perceive as it's thrown into our faces, it also, on some level, desensitizes us to some things that we probably like unhealthily. Like from my own personal experience, and this is going to lead to a question, but so I don't do social media, although I ended up getting an Instagram account so I could see some pictures that somebody wanted me to see on a regular basis. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm not going to put a profile. I'm not going to have myself on there. And I'm not going to follow any people that I know. I'll just follow this handbag account, and I'll just follow this sock maker because I love these handbags and socks, which is true. So I start, and I'm like, that's pretty harmless because I don't read the news. I don't like to have any of that because it flames up my anxiety level. So I noticed that it's like almost a hit that I need to have. It's like this drug where I need a hit of information, something to make me feel something. And a lot of times it's stuff that one would say creates a fear response. It's like it's working with this addiction center in my brain that's tapping into something that makes me want more and more of it. Like I eliminated the Instagram account like 2 days ago because I found myself constantly checking to get a hit. Is there an update? Is there a new picture? Is there this or that? And it's like, I want this hit. And I would do the same thing with like headline news. I want to see this guy shoots up the school or this or that because it's like almost a physical need for this hit with this rush that comes from being afraid of something, which on one hand was feeding this, maybe it's personal addiction to feeling something, or on the other side of it, it was almost desensitizing me to things, like things that would have shocked me, hearing about 10 years ago. It's like you hear about it all the time now, so it really doesn't faze you. So I guess my question that I would be leading up to is that, do you think that it's possible to turn around the direction that we are all headed into with all this onslaught of media and the fear-based attacks and the assaults on us every day on this certain level? Do you think that it's possible to all of a sudden turn that around, or do you just think it's some direction that we're heading into? Like I always said, I would never be attached to technology. I always was like, how could somebody be checking their phone all the time or checking their email, and Jim is caution, we're going to merge with in technology and we're going to become robots and they're going to take over and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, well, I'll never do that. Well, of course I do that. I've turned into one of those people. I'm done. So is this just the direction that we're headed in? Is it possible to stop, turn around? What are your thoughts on that?
It's something new. When things are new and you have new paradigms, and new paradigms aren't just conceptual. Paradigms can also be part of your culture. Things that you do when you have new technology creates new paradigms. An internet is a whole new paradigm about how we interact as people. When you have those, there's usually some turmoil that goes with it. You have to adjust to it. And usually you end up with excesses before you then return to something that's more workable. So there's a couple of things going on here. One of the reasons that bad news is so engrossing and good news is like nice, but it doesn't really hold your attention, whereas the bad news, you want to hear more, you want to understand more. Part of that's just part of our instincts, survival instincts. If somebody ate the little black berries on that kind of a bush and fell over dead, we want to know about it because we want to make sure we don't eat those berries from that kind of bush because it could be that they're poisonous, they're lethal. If somebody ate those berries and had a really good time and felt full and happy, well, that's not news that's going to save our life. That's not news that's critical to our survival. Other than maybe it means we can eat those too if we wait a little bit and make sure they don't die the next day. So it's different. The news of things bad happening grabs us and rivets us because of our survival instincts to know what is out there that can get you and how can I avoid from being gotten. So everybody wants to know the bad things that can happen, and then everybody's pulled into those things. So part of it's just survival instincts from 200,000 years ago that we still have. That's why the little old lady who is nice to children doesn't, it's a little interest story back in the family section, on page 35, but it's not headlines. Whereas, something's just found out to be toxic. Well, that's headlines because people want to know, that kind of thing. So that's part of it. The other part of it is that You know, there's this kind of race going on between technology and our ability to use that technology wisely. The technology seems to be evolving faster than the quality of our consciousness, which is what's required to use it intelligently. Hopefully we will catch up, and right now we're kind of out of balance. So we have technology that has impacts on us, and we think very little about what the impacts might be. We just jump right ahead and go with the technology just because it's there, and then let the impacts figure out, sort out however they do, which is not real clever. You should think about the impacts of things before you jump into them. So that's another thing. So we are enamored now of news by the minute. There's lots of people that, if they don't hear a news report in 5 or 6 hours, they're desperate to find out what's going on. And now it used to be just in their neighborhood and just in their little town, but now it's all over the world, so there's a whole lot more news. And news junkies are, probably 80–90% of the population. Eventually you realize that news really isn't all that profitable. If the things you're spending your time on don't help you grow up, they're not really very useful. All they do is keep you frightened or in a state of anxiety and agitation, which is not healthy, and it's not helpful for your growing up. If you're constantly on the edge of panic and distress and what horrible things are going on, you're not really thinking deeply about who you are, what's authentic, what your fears are. You're so engrossed with what your fears are that you don't even notice that you're fearful all the time, which is kind of what's happened to our culture in the last 25 years or so. But new things often create dislocations and problems, usually to excess. To excess, we overdo it. We say, whoa, that's not good. We're doing too much of this, and then we start to come back. And I think it's just the way that pendulum swings. We're not real clever people as a species. It's not until we go way past the point of optimism, way up into the extreme someplace, before we start to think about this isn't a good idea. And then we often go back and pass right through that optimal point again and go over to the other extreme. We tend to do that sort of thing, and eventually we settle down and hone on something that's better. But that seems to take a generation or two to do that. It's not quick. Yeah, I haven't looked at a commercial TV program in probably 45 years. Well, actually, the last commercial TV I watched was when the World Trade Center fell down, and I wanted to watch that to see it because it was a big event. And that was probably the first time I'd watched a commercial TV program in probably 30 years before that. And then I did tune into the commercial stations just to watch that, and haven't watched it since. So I don't watch TV. I don't find there's much there. But these days, that's not true anymore. It was 40 years ago, but these days there's good stuff on TV too. There's a lot of stuff that's educational, stuff that helps you understand things. And so there's some good things. We have the good stuff in there too. We just have to be selective to be able to turn on what's good and get rid of what isn't. So it's up to us, and that comes back to our quality of consciousness. If we have that quality of consciousness, we'll just look at all that stuff that we, all that kind of scary, nasty stuff, and say that, don't need that. That's not a positive part of my growth. I don't have to know that. I mean, you generally have to be aware of that there is a world and it's outside there and there's things going on in it, but in my way of thinking, if the news is important enough to be in that 35-second blurb that gets when the alarm clock goes off or something, if it's important enough to get there, then maybe I should listen, but otherwise I don't need to know. Or there's so many news junkies around me that somebody will tell me if the sky's falling, in general, I just don't pay much attention to it because it's just not that important. What's going on in the physical world is of little importance, other than just the fact that it's out there and that is going on. A sense of how ugly is it? You need that, but you don't need the details. It doesn't need to be graphic, up close and personal. So it's us having to grow up to make the most of our technology and not to use it for for bad things. Like we have an internet, and when the internet first started, it was a way for universities to communicate. It started out as a communication between educational centers, and then it spread out a little more, and it was going to be a way for doctors to send x-rays and stuff around because patients move around, and it kind of did that. And then it got a little bigger, and then lots of people joined it, and then it got commercial. And then once there were millions of people using it, then the hucksters and the people who would like to trick us out of our money, they got involved in it. And then it got to be, full of things that were not pleasant. It's just the way we work. Our technologies, what we do with our technologies, are a representation of who we are as far as quality of consciousness. So there is a lot of ugliness on the internet, but there's a lot of good things on the internet too. A lot of great information on the internet. So all in all, I think the internet's a wonderful thing, but that doesn't mean that there's enough things that we have to outgrow. We have to get past. You can't blame the internet on the poor quality of the people who are using it. It's not really the internet's problem. It's not the internet that's awful. The internet's great. The internet finally leveled the playing field so that everybody could play, not just the big boys who had the $1 billion in the bank, but everybody. You write a song and you sing it and you want to publish it, you just put it out there, and if people like it, it'll spread. Before, couldn't do that. You want to sing a song, well, you'd have to go get a deal with some major label, otherwise nobody would ever hear your song. So it's been a big help. Leveled the playing field for me as well. I'm an author, right? I have books out there. And I started to go to a publisher at first, and I found all the publishers really didn't understand how they were going to sell this book, because they want to sell books. That's their idea. And my book was sort of science. It was sort of self-help. It was sort of philosophy. It was sort of a whole bunch of things. And they said, pick one. Throw the rest away and pick one, and we might be interested. But as long as it was this whole smear of stuff, then they couldn't put it in a category and really give it a thing. They didn't want it. So it was like, 900 pages, really? Cut this down to 300 pages and make it on a single topic and we'll be interested. But that isn't what I wanted to say. But because there was an internet, I just put up an internet site and didn't do anything else. And the first year, I maybe sold 4 books that year, it was that sort of thing. It takes a while, but people get something out of it. If there's value, the value will be shared. If there's no value, it won't. And I just assume, well, we'll see whether its time has come or not. I just let it up there. I didn't advertise it. And eventually it spread and spread and spread. So now I got 48,000 subscribers on YouTube. But, and I sell about 250 books a month. But shoot, at the end of 4 or 5 years, I was selling maybe a book a week. 52 books a year, it wasn't much. But eventually, if my opinion was, if it had value, it will eventually spread. If it doesn't have value, then it won't spread. It just has to stand on its own merits. So it's good to have internets. Otherwise, you're stuck with what everybody else thinks that you ought to read or listen to. But yeah, that kind of thing with the news and being drawn into Facebook or Instagram or anything else. It's just the need to be plugged in, the need to feel like you're a part of this, that you're watchful. You know something bad's coming, you know about it ahead of time. But that frightens us for the most part. We've always had bad things happen because there's bad people in the world. There's people of very low quality consciousness. Generally, the quality of consciousness is better now than it was, 100 years ago. But we're probably 2 or 3 times more frightened now than we were 100 years ago of this world. We're terrified of it. Most of that terror probably has a 1 in 5,000 chance of ever being experienced. But we're terrified of it anyway because we see it. We see hours of it in front of us all the time. So you just have to wean yourself off the stuff that's not profitable. If it really isn't helping you grow up, then it isn't very important. So I look in on not so much news, but as I hear things that interest me, I'll go look and see if there's anything of any significance, and most of the time the answer is no. So I just kind of skip it. Very little catches my attention. I'm looking more at trends, big things that happen, not individual events that happen. That helps you understand a bigger picture if you look at trends rather than events. So I don't know if that helps, but do I think we can get over it? Yes, I think we'll outgrow it. I think we'll outgrow it. And mainly we will outgrow it for the same thing we talked about earlier, and that is that hopefully in the next couple of decades we're going to grow up a lot more. We're on that part of the curve where the change is accelerating. And so I think we're going to make that change. And if we accelerate to where the quality of consciousness takes a big leap forward, a lot of the nastiness will just disappear. A lot of the fear stuff will disappear. I mean, look now at the traction that conspiracy theories get in the media and on the internet. And there's almost nothing there but fear. It's not there's no such thing as a conspiracy. It's just that they're all fear-based. It's all about fear. And it's all about being a victim. It's all about being incapable of dealing with these big events that are going to roll over you like a steamroller, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's all about being inconsequential and unempowered and helpless. Well, when you're helpless and full of fear, you get a great big handle on your back that says, manipulate me. Yeah. Sometimes I think that a lot of the nonsense that's on the internet is put out there on purpose, just to keep the fear cranked up. Just stuff to make it so that you can't believe anything. You see, which kind of undermines the cohesiveness of a society. Just like the trends we have in corporate trends now are not to try to satisfy. It's not the customer's king, but the customer is the pigeon, or the mark, or whatever you call them, the person to take advantage of. So you hear things now, and your immediate reaction is to discount them. If somebody's selling something, then you don't give it much truth. Somebody comes up and, this happened and that happens, and it just goes in one ear and out the other. Nobody pays attention because there's so many liars telling lies that the people who tell truth never get noticed. Well, that's how you tame the internet. The internet made everybody with a cell phone a reporter with a camera and a mic, and all kinds of things would go out there. So the way you deal with that, if you're somebody who does things that you need privacy and you need to hide what it is you do, is to undermine the veracity of everything on the internet so that, okay, here's a truth teller and they tell the truth, this happened and that happened, nobody paying attention to them because it's just another somebody else, you know, saying something that's outlandish, and so that way this internet that was going to catch all the bad guys in the act of doing bad things in the political world and in the corporate world, it doesn't have any pull anymore because it's flooded with nonsense and false things and lies. So you can't believe anything you hear or read. Therefore, those truth tellers among us that would like to, you know, inform, they can't. So I think a lot of the nonsense we get is actually put out there just to be nonsense, and the fearful stuff is concocted just to create more fear. But that's not a conspiracy theory. It's just people who have a low quality of consciousness trying to get more power and control.
Just to play the devil's advocate for a moment, I'm inclined to believe with you over the generations will probably advance. Our consciousness and our behavior will get better, but I think you would agree that technology is clearly, I mean, not only is it ahead of where we are as beings right now, but it is truly accelerating. I mean, there's no question about that. It's about to explode.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas our consciousness or our well-being, our love toward each other is almost infantile. I mean, it's just growing, but it's not growing nearly as quickly as technology is.
Mm-hmm.
So to play devil's advocate, I would say I'm hopeful that they're going to catch up, but something big better happen over here on the humanity side,
Mm-hmm.
or the game's going to be lost before long.
Yeah, well, I would agree with that, but not lost, just delayed.
Yeah.
Just delayed.
Well,
Not
things
really.
can happen. I mean, technology can
Yeah.
have a setback.
Well, you
Sure.
know, but we've been dealing with that now since, you know, we had nuclear weapons. Right. Since we had nuclear weapons, there was this potential that we were all going to, you know, be put back in the Stone Age because there'd be little left after enough nuclear radiation was spread around the world. A couple of movies made to that effect, as I recall. And, you know, so we've had that where technology has been able to, well, even now, I think there's like 4 or 5 ways to destroy the world. You know, we can destroy it with pollution and garbage. We can destroy it with microbes and things. We can destroy it with weapons and so on. There's lots of ways that we can self-destruct. But there's only one way that we can grow up. Okay. That's generally the nature of reality. You always have 1,000 bad choices for every good choice. You know, there's you know, whatever decision you come to, you decide to do something or you decide to build something, there's only 1 or 2 or 3 right ways to go forward. That's the low entropy way, the way that everybody wins, and that in the long run you have lower entropy. That's the right way. There's only a couple of ways to go forward in that direction. But look at all the ways to maximize entropy, or all the ways to do it wrong. There's thousands of ways to do it wrong. There's thousands of ways to increase entropy. That's where the two-year-olds are stuck. They want to have power. And there's, you know, it's very hard to do that positively. But on the negative side, there's all kinds of ways that you can have power. You can break things, throw things over, you know, take the food off your plate and throw it on the floor. I mean, there's all kinds of ways that you can make statements that you're important and that you exist and that, you know, you have free will. But there's very few ways that you can do that positively. So it's always like that. The choice to go forward is just a couple of, well, we maybe could go forward this way and this way. And those would be really good ways. And everything else would be suboptimal. but then there's big choices otherwise. But we've had that forever. It's always been that way. Technology is accelerating. Once it got to digital, then that was the latest explosion, was digital. Once things got digital, they got flexible, and they could be applied to almost everything. And then we've had this big blossoming ever since that. That's why we have an internet. It's because things went digital before that. And we've only begun. Like I say, in a decade from now or 2 decades from now, what we're doing today will be kind of quaint. It's going to change a lot. But I'm hoping also that 1 or 2 decades from now, we'll have this idea that there's something bigger, more fundamental than us, and non-physical, that gives us purpose. You know, what is our purpose? That's gonna be growing too. And it could also take a big spin up. Those two have been chasing each other a long time, and typically the technology stays out ahead because it's easier. Growing up is harder to do. But if you look on the bright side, even if we bomb ourselves back to the Stone Age, well, we get to start over there.
That's right.
We get to chug.
It'd be easier to start there.
Yeah, we get to start chugging along again, and it's evolution. It'll keep on chugging no matter what happens. So we'll eventually get there.
About that.
Huh?
I hadn't thought about that cherry possibility.
Yeah. We'll eventually get there. We're just playing this part. We're learning what we can learn. We're interacting. We're caring, and we do the best we can. And after that, the rest happens however it does. No need to have any investment in the ending. It'll just be whatever it is. So that's kind of the attitude. Don't get a negative attitude because things look bad. They've always looked bad. Again, there's always more bad choices than good choices. Just have the positive attitude that you're doing the best you can to make the best choices you can, to care, to love, and the rest of it just happens however it happens. And if we start over at the cave, well, maybe we'll do it better next time. And then you'll get to reincarnate as a cave guy. Start over. And then one day we'll find digital again, and we'll just see if we can't do better. But I expect we'll do better. We'll do better each time because we, consciousness, are evolving. We're growing each time. So we'll go a little faster, and we'll get there a little quicker, and we'll do a little better next time. So I wouldn't have any negative feeling about, oh no, look what might happen. Oh. Right.
Spend a day in our house.
Oh,
Every minute something's going to happen.
yeah. Look what might happen. The world's going to be taken over by robots, right?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Artificial intelligence.
Yeah, and all the terrible things can happen. Okay, they might, but let's us do the best we can to grow ourselves up, because we can't grow up anybody else, and we'll try to make other people's environments secure so they can grow themselves up too. And then you let the chips fall where they may. It's okay. New challenges, new things to do, new choices to make, new ways of growing up, well.
It can't be completely laissez-faire. I mean, you got to try to steer things in the right direction.
Well.
So if for example, we had some power to influence others to take care with nuclear weapons, or to put fences around AGI or those types of things, then we certainly should use that power to exert that influence for the benefit of everybody around us.
That's part of the things you can do. You can educate, right? You can be an educational source for people. You can try to convince them to see a different path, or be aware of things. But you also have to realize that they are who they are, and you can't make them be anything they're not. So that's part of you doing the best you can, is being a good example, being a good advocate, being a good educator, as best you can, but not that you manipulate people. You see, if you decide, well, the way we need to deal with this invasion of the robots is to scare everybody about robots. Hey guys, look what happened in 2001, Hal, he killed the whole crew. So frightening people is counterproductive. So trying to manipulate people to do what you think is right by scaring them is in the long run going to backfire, which is typically what we do in our culture. Because we know if you want to manipulate people, scaring them is the way to manipulate them, is through fear. So we tend to use fear, and then it doesn't work out that well because we create another monster while we're trying to get rid of that monster. It's never ending. So if you can truly influence people to think deeper thoughts or better thoughts in a way that isn't spreading fear, then you're part of the solution. But if you're just scaring people to agree with you or to see it your way, then you're still part of the problem, even if your way is a rational way. So that's kind of the problem we have. There was the atomic scientists, Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, and they have this big doomsday clock, right? And the clock tells you when it gets to midnight, it's doomsday, right? So this little hand keeps getting closer and closer, and sometimes it would back up and then we get close again. Or you get Bush's green light, caution light and red light. All of these things are fear-based.
We're all gonna die.
Yeah, they're all fear-based, and they don't help. In the long run, they do more damage than they're worth. It just helps to become a fearful society, and it ends up doing things like Ephraim said. It ends up skewing the way we see the world and the way we see our reality, and then the way we vote and everything else. This general fear, and all I was trying to do is make people aware of how dangerous the world was, but it has a lot of other effects when people get fearful.
I know I'm beginning to dominate this conversation, but to take that a step further, if many of us have fear and we have certain expectations of bad outcomes, then that actually can influence those outcomes. If we do live in a probabilistic
Exactly,
universe.
that helps those outcomes materialize.
So that's a strong argument for not thinking like that.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, I'm just going to forget about all that. Everything's going to work out fine. No problems.
That's it. Well, it's not so much that. It's not that you have to convince yourself that everything's going to be fine. It all may go to hell in a handbasket. But you've done the best that you could do to lower your entropy, to live your life, to become love. You've done your due diligence, where you see that somebody else is seeking, you might help them see a bigger picture. You're part of other people's progress. You help other people grow up. But you don't manipulate them to grow up or scare them to grow up. If you can really influence them some other way, usually by caring about them, you get them to grow up, then good, you're part of the solution. But as soon as it turns to fearful stuff, so it's not that you have to be Pollyanna and everything's going to be fine. Don't worry about anything. It's always fine. Well, it may be a disaster, but that's not your choice. You're not in charge of disasters, not in charge of preventing them. You can't do that. I have problems with people. I don't have problems with people. People have problems, and they talk to me about it, that they say that they have become dysfunctional in their life. They can't function because they are so upset about how ugly and awful this world is. They feel so much pain and so much agony over all the suffering people everywhere, and about all the nasty people everywhere, and it's just they're so wadded up with the pain of dealing with the nastiness in the world that they just can no longer function. And I had one guy that I responded to in the last Fireside Chat, and his suggestion was that all the human beings should kill themselves, and then everything else would do a whole lot better.
There's people that believe that.
Yeah. Well,
Believe we should not have any humans on
that's where this person was coming from, and that's ego. If you get all balled up over that, that is your ego. Things are not the way I want them. And that's a problem. Things need to be the way I want them. And if they're not the way I want them, it's a problem. It's awful. And I can't make them be the way they want them, because what I want is the people on the other side of the planet to stop fighting each other. And I can't make them. Therefore, I'm impotent, I can't do anything, and it's horrible, and I just can't live here. You know, well, that's an ego throwing a little hissy fit because it can't get its way. It can't get things the way it wants them. And if it can't get it the way it wants it, then it's just no point being here. So you lie down on the floor, you kick your feet, you bang your head, and you scream, you know, until somebody fixes it the way you want it. You see, that's just a childish approach to somebody who's not getting what they want. The point is, as long as you are there saying things are so awful, gosh, they're so awful, we don't have any power, we can't do anything about it, you're part of the problem. You are part of that fear, victim, impotent problem. So it's not only are things not the way we'd like them to be, but you, in having that reaction to it, are part of that problem. So you want to stop being part of the problem and start being part of the solution, which is, how can I help? What can I do? Well, you can't go over and make the people stop fighting with each other. That's not something you can do. But you can stop fighting with your boss or your wife or your children. You can see a bigger picture. You can grow up. And at least in your little world that you connect to, you can shed some light. You can shed some love. You can improve things a little bit, and that will help them improve, and they'll help others improve. That is what you can do. That makes you part of the solution. The war is going to be whatever they do over there. You know, they're doing it for their own reasons. Probably because their ancestors hated each other too. You know, and the ancestors' ancestors, they probably didn't like each other either. And they're still at it today. You know, who knows what their motivation is, but they are as they are. Accept that. It's like that. Now, how can I be positive? How can I be positive? And oh no, oh woe is me. It's so awful. You know, this is a terrible place. It's so ugly. I have so much pain for the poor people who are having trouble. It's like, well, you know, grow up. You know, suck it up, cupcake. Get over it. You know, become a positive part of this world. Do something that makes you part of the solution. Whining about it until somebody changes it, or vote for daddy, you know. Big daddy's gonna fix it, right? I learned from John Wayne, and I'm in charge, and when I'm in charge, we'll just fix everything. Well, sure, vote for him, because that's gonna be your savior. You know, it's just, you know, that's the thing with being negative, is that it puts you into part of the problem. You help create that negative stuff being manifested. You help everybody else get depressed. You put more fear into the world of all the awful things that might happen. And that is feeding the problem, not working against the problem. So it's not that you're Pollyanna, oh, everything will be all right. No, don't worry about it. It's not so much that, is you just accept it the way it is. But you do your best to grow, to become love and help other people. And that's as much as you can do. It's as much as you can do. So if you've done that, then you're doing fine. You're great. And you're evolving. And your consciousness quality is growing. And that's what's important. So the negativity and all the stuff we're afraid of is all stuff that is possible, awful stuff that might happen someday. And we let that make us depressed, which then actually makes horrible stuff happen all around us, because we're depressed. You know, our relationships don't work out very well because we're constantly under stress and anxiety. You know, we don't treat our children the way we should, or our parents, or our bosses, or our coworkers. We're kind of grouchy and on edge, and we get cynical. All we can talk about is how bad things are, how everything's going to hell in the handbasket. And pretty soon, you see the whole thing kind of collapses in on itself. That's not the way forward. You don't want to get in that cynical boat. It's like, all right, okay, so it may go hell in a handbasket, and we all may die, and whatever, nuclear winter, and global warming. Maybe global warming and nuclear winter will cancel each other out. Whatever, you just say it's just, if that's the way we, the people, do, then that's what we, the people, deserve. We're creating a reality that, represents us. And if what we deserve is to all be bombed back to the Stone Age, well, then that's what we need. Maybe we'll do better next time. So we'll create it. So if you have that positive outlook, that's the same thing as saying just let people be. Let them be who they are. Don't try to manipulate them. Just try to live with them. Try to find something positive you can say to them. Something that supports them some way. Even if they're just a nasty, ugly person. Maybe there's something you can say nice to them. Oh, I like your earrings today, or something, something you could say to them, even if you really don't like them that much. You might just say it anyway, just because it would make them feel better, as long as they don't think you're being sarcastic.
As long as you don't smile when you say it.
You have to be sincere. This being kind thing is a sincere thing. People know you're sincere when you're sincere, and they know when you're not. So don't worry about the robot hordes that are going to take over.
Not today. Especially after that lecture.
Yeah, just don't worry about it. If that happens, then we deserve it.
I'm giving it up now, I promise.
It's okay. It's okay. We get what we deserve and what we need. It's all part of our growth path. You just need a bigger picture.
I wanted to ask you about dreams. Specifically, you've said before, I believe, that you act from a being level in dreams, not a lucid dream, but just a normal dream. And to that, I don't think I've heard you elaborate on that much, but to that extent, I've kind of tried to use that as a litmus test for myself for kind of assessing my progress. And I kind of feel like I've gotten inconsistent feedback, where sometimes I'll have a dream where I behaved quite commendably, and other times where, I would say I was fairly horrified by my behavior in the dream. So I guess I would have expected it to be more consistent, at least in some short amount of
It's
time.
only going to be as consistent as you are. So you probably have some inconsistency as well. It's typical with people. We don't just kind of all grow up, all aspects of ourselves all grow up at the same time together. Sometimes this part of you grows up and this part not so much. And then later on, maybe this will catch up and maybe it'll pass that. So there's lots of aspects of ourselves, and they don't all grow up in the same way, in the same time. And yes, it's true, in your dreams, you work straight from the being level, and what you see is who you are in those dreams. But another measure of how you're doing, if you want to get an idea of how well you're doing in your growth, just be aware of the times when you have a negative feeling. Anytime you have a negative feeling indicates that there's ego and fear and belief involved. And the ego and belief are because of the fear. So if your life is mainly happy and positive, with very little stress, very little anxiety, very little annoyance, life is good. In general, it's just fun and so on, then you're doing very well. But if you're constantly in a struggle, your life is just a constant struggle, then you've got a lot to learn. So that's the best litmus test to see how you're doing, is just look at your emotions. Now, if you're very, very left brain, you may even think that you don't have emotions, or at least not much. Very, very left brain people hardly have emotions because they only think. You see, they live out of their heads and they only think. And they say, well, these things happen. Well, I analyze them. You know, I don't get anxiety or upset. I just analyze things. So everything's analyzed, and then I put it all in an appropriate pigeonhole. Yeah, okay, I've analyzed this, and that's what that means. We'll stick it there and do it. And they live their life out of their heads. But even if you're very, very left brain, you still have emotions. You have feelings. Even if you don't let them come up into your consciousness very often, you still have those feelings. And you probably can feel them better, say, from a meditation state than you can elsewhere. Now, people who are left brain are just, people who are right brained are just the opposite. They feel everything. They feel it all, you know. Even the stuff they don't want to feel, they feel it anyway. And it's all about feeling. Yeah. So it's easy for you to look at your feelings when you're right-brained and know how you're doing, because if you're full of anxiety and you're struggling and so on, well, that means you've got a ways to go. You have fear that you're trying to deal with. So even though the very left-brain people, they do have feelings. They need to get in touch with them a little more, familiarity with them so that they can accept them. No, you can't push anybody. But that's the key. That's the key litmus test of how you're doing, is basically your feeling space. And, you know, feelings are like dreams. If you want to dream a lot, just start writing down about your dreams. You know, start to pay attention to them. Make them important. And then you'll start dreaming a lot. It's the same with your feelings. Make your feelings something that's an important part of you. It's an important aspect of you. Give it your attention. Look for them, you know. Write them down if you like a dream log. You know, you can write them down. Well, I really felt annoyed today, or I really felt down today for these reasons. And the more you give them your attention, the more of them you'll have. And the more they'll come around, and you won't be so much locked in your head. You'll have that feeling space will become available to you. And you'll like it. A feeling space adds richness to your life. A mental space is more, austere is a word, but that's not quite the right word. It's more sterile. Your mental space is more sterile. Your emotional space is a lot warmer, a lot of texture to your life, you know. So it's good if you're left brain to learn to let those emotions come up. Don't keep them all down. You know, we get this idea that the perfect person to be would be a robot, you know. No, not a scary robot that's going to get us in the future, but just a robot, just a robot that analyzes everything and never finds any emotions. You know, Spock, right? Spock, you know, Kirk says, well, it looks like we're all going to die in 15 minutes. And Spock says, well, you know, the probability that we're going to die in 15 minutes is 99.56724. But there is one chance in 6 million that if this happens and that happens, that we could maybe survive. And he's just totally not caring whether he's going to die in 15 minutes or not. He's just going through the processes. And we think that if we could just be like Spock, that everything would be better, and all these emotions just gum up the works, and they get in the way, and the feelings get sticky. And if we let those feelings come up, we say things we regret because we're angry or sad, and so we push those down, and we want to be Spock. We want to not have any emotions, or if we do, we don't want them to show. And that really eliminates most of the texture, most of the importance in your life, kind of reduces it to a minimum. It's better to be a whole person rather than all right brain and all left brain. We in our culture are very left brain dominant because that's what pays. If you're very left brain, you'll make more money. You have more status. You get more respect. If you're very right brain, you're an airhead. And people will tell you that, you know, you don't get a lot of respect, and you don't get paid high salaries. You just get a lot of answers. and you understand things and you know things, but you don't know why you know them or how you know them. You just know them, and if somebody says, well, explain that to me. How do you know that? Oh, you say, well, I don't know, because you don't know why. You just know that you do, and you learn to live with that. And you have lots of feelings. It's better to be a whole brain person. So we're extremely right brain and extremely left brain both at the same time. And then those two work together beautifully, because you need both. And where one of them is weak, the other one fills in strength, and and vice versa. So then the two of them work really good. You do a little analysis here, that's great, and then you pull a little data out of the database there with that right brain, and that makes it all make sense, and it just works great. You don't want to be out of balance. That's the worst thing. And we tend to be out of balance in our culture to the left side, to the logical process side, because we've been told that emotion is just kind of gooey stuff that gets in the way and makes you say things you regret and feel things that you regret. But it doesn't. It adds richness to your life that is important. It's very important.
So, Tom, I've heard that advice about writing down your dreams in a journal, and you'll have more. I've never even thought or heard about the same idea with emotions.
The emotions are the same way. If you're going to write them down in a journal, well, I felt really sad today, or I felt up, or I felt out of it, or whatever, however you felt, and write it down and along with the circumstances around it, and pretty soon you'll start feeling more things and more things. You'll be more aware of your feelings. Anything you give your attention to starts to come up. Everything you take your attention away from starts to recede into the background. It's like my daughter, who was so afraid of pain that she'd get a splinter, and she'd sit down and out would go the thumb, where she got the splinter, and I'd get the tweezers and I'd get about 4 inches from her thumb, and she'd scream, because she was so into it's gonna hurt, it's gonna hurt, it's gonna feel terrible. She's sitting there with her eyes shut and she starts screaming. And it's like, I haven't touched you yet, we haven't even started. Oh, haven't started yet? Yeah. You go into a dentist and you expect it's going to hurt. Well, it hurts 10 times worse because you have that up in the fore of your mind. If you go into the dentist and say, it's no big deal. They're just going to grind out some soft junk in the teeth, and then they'll put some other stuff in it, and it's going to be fine. All right, it's not going to be pleasant, but it's not going to be that big a deal either. And you'll find that you can get fillings in your teeth without any Novocaine or without anything else, and they're not a big deal. They're only a big deal when you get so wrapped up in how awful it's going to be, and then any tiny little thing is excruciating. So what we bring to the foreground we get more sensitive, and so yes, you can do the exact same thing with your feelings. If you're a very left brain individual dealing in a logical process, and the feelings are kind of down there someplace, but you don't feel them except only the ones that are really major. Everything else kind of stays even. Start writing them down. Start noticing them, paying attention to them, and just doing that, they'll start to get richer. And you'll like them. The feeling's good. It makes you feel more connected, more a part of things than it does if you just do a logical process. It helps develop that side of you. The idea is to develop all of our talents. Feelings are a part of that.
Good. Thank you.
Oh, go ahead.
This is related to dreams too. I'm in the gooey feelings all day, and when I dream at night, it's always about problem solving. I feel like I'm exhausted in the morning. I mean, these are like problems like, okay, if this went around this way, and what would you do if to make this go around this way and to catch that hook to bring it around. It's like machines and like I'm solving these technical problems. and I have them all the time. And I wake up, I was like, whoo, I got a lot of work done last night.
Well,
What's going on?
I expect what's going on with you is that the system is giving you a little training in logical process thinking.
Is that what that is?
I would say they think you're probably not in balance. You're more right brain than left brain, which of course you are, and that you're doing some logical process homework at night.
So I'm not at the being level when I'm asleep dreaming.
So yeah, you're at the being level. You're at the being level, but you're learning to pay attention to detail and process and things in sequence. First you got to go here, then you have to go to this hook, then you need to go to the others,
Yeah.
and you're learning there's process in it and the details, and you got to follow the details and follow the process. That's what left brain thinking does.
Is that what that is?
Yes. So you're just being trained in to become a little more balanced. So these are balancing dreams to help balance you out. You're spending your nights doing logical process. You spend your days in
La La Land.
right brain awareness.
Emotional goo.
Yeah.
The other little piece I had, was you going to say something else?
No, the same thing happens the other way. A lot of people who are very left brain, when they dream, their dreams are very emotional. Their dreams are very emotional. Horrible things happen or wonderful things happen, and emotions are strong and deep, and they'll get dreams like that because that helps them develop a little bit of the right side.
That's just brilliant.
Yeah,
This is a smart system.
it is.
One of the things, the last thing is when I first started listening to your work, you were talking about fear tests. And one of my dreams, as I was trying to construct one of those erector sets or something, as I was starting to come to, there was these neon hands, like there was a red one and a green one and a blue one, and they were just neon hands, and then every now and then it'd come up and try to touch me, and it would try to scare me, and I was listening to one of your videos after I had that neon hand dream, and you were talking about a neon hand dream that what they were fear tests, and it was the same test. You may not remember, well, you may remember, but it was almost identical to what you were talking about, and I had two of them. And after the first one, I went, but then after the second one, I went, okay, there's something going on. There are these fear tests, and I think everybody gets them, depending on who you are and what kinds you need. And the neon hands, I mean, I thought they looked really cool, but when one come up and grabbed me, I was out. I didn't pass that test, but I've passed a couple after that. But those neon hands was something.
Yeah, well, fear tests are very common. The system wants to help you grow up, and growing up is letting go of fear. So the system will help you have things that are useful to you, like the dreams that are useful to you, based on its assessment of where your fear level is. So growing up is really just letting go of the fear. So if it knows your fear level's here, then it knows better how to help somebody who has this fear level. If your fear level's down there, then it knows how to help somebody with that fear level, what they need to learn next. So you'll often will have fear tests. And the test isn't so much for you. You don't get a grade, or a gold star or black star next to your name or anything. It's for the system, for it to understand best how to work with you, where you are. So it doesn't give you things that are too scary, too challenging. It doesn't give you things that are not challenging enough. It gives you things that are just about where you can reach out and meet the challenge. So when you get a fear test, particularly if you realize it's a fear test, that hand comes out, just shake it. Nice to meet you.
Oh, I didn't know about.
Yeah.
I didn't know anything about fear tests when I had that. I learned about it later on when you were talking in a video and you were talking about neon hands, and I went, I had that same thing. I loved the way it looked, but then when one of them come up and started trying to grab me, I was out.
Yes. So those are tests by the system so it can better gauge how to help you, where you are, and what sort of things you need. And it generally will start mild and then get worse and worse until it finds a point where you freak out. See, some people will freak out just looking at the hands. Oh, what are all those disembodied hands doing out there? And then they freak out. Well, you passed that part, but you got to the part where they reached out and grabbed you, and then that was as far as you wanted to go with it. So, yes.
Nobody wants to ask a question?
Yeah, then pass him the mic, please. We have a question.
I've heard you contrast what I would call two different ways of approaching life. One way I think you characterized as manipulation, trying to control everything and make things come out the way you want them. And the other way is what I might call living in the now. I think the way you put it is let things happen and respond to them. And most of my life, I was a firm believer in the first way, trying to make things come out a certain way and trying so hard and all. And the results weren't that great. But I would say over the last year or so, I started operating the other way. And I was astonished at the results because even though I really wasn't trying, it just seemed like life was organizing itself to fulfill my needs in a way that I couldn't possibly have controlled or made turn out if that had been my intention. And just to give an example, I went through a period where all of a sudden my workload went down at work, and I was wondering what's going on, what's happening. I talked to my boss, and then I had to deal with some major issues in my personal life that were quite time-consuming, and I was so grateful I could take time off and address them. And it seemed no sooner had I finished resolving these personal issues, all of a sudden my workload came up. And if I tried to engineer that, I couldn't have done that in any conceivable way. Yet I had the sense the whole time that there was this kind of benign intelligence that was kind of, in some ways, directing by not directing things. And things were just spontaneously happening in my life to facilitate my well-being. And it was an awesome experience. I wonder if you could give me your reaction.
Sure, that is just the way it works. As much as you try to force the world to be the way you want it, that's how hard the world struggles to be some other way. It just is like that. I often have the metaphor of trying to stuff too many clothes in a suitcase. If you ever had more things to put in a suitcase than the suitcase would hold, and you try it, so you lift it up a little crack and you stuff something in, but something else falls out on the other side. And then you try to get that in and something else falls out over here, and you just keep trying to get it the way you want it, but it just doesn't ever seem to work. And the harder you work at it, the worse it gets. Well, that's the way life is if you approach it through control. And control, I mean, you try to arrange life, you try to manipulate things in your life so that they come out the way you know is best. Okay, that's you trying to manipulate the world to be the way you want it. And when you do that, it's because you want to control it. You want to control things. And you want to control things because if things are out of control, they might happen in a way that you don't want, in a way that you wouldn't want to see it. So you want to control your world. That often comes from the basic fear of not being in control, or that's called a fear of the unknown, things happening outside of your control. You get a fear of the unknown. If I don't make it come out this way, it might come out horribly. If I don't work on this problem, we may be overrun by robots in the future. You know, so something you know, that you.
Quit kicking the dog while he's
So, the more you do that, the more frustration you build because it just won't work. The world will just not agree with you. And if you just need this one thing to happen, it's that one thing just won't happen. You know, everything would be all right if. And most of the time, there's some reason why that if doesn't fall into place. Or if it does fall into place, you sit back and go, all right, I got it now. Within 2 or 3 weeks, something else will occur. And if you get over that hurdle, something else will occur. And your life will be just a series of hurdles for you to get over that you have to, you know, struggle over all the time. You know, if I just get over this hurdle, you know, it'll be all downhill from now on and everything will work great. And it doesn't ever work out that way. Only for a few weeks, and then the next hurdle comes up. That's you trying to manipulate life to be the way you want it. Actually, it's the way you think you want it. It's the way your intellect has decided it needs to be. The magic is that when you give that up and you stop trying to manipulate, you let everybody just be the way they are, make the choices they make without trying to make sure they're better choices. You just live it. You interact with it and make sure that the choices you make, your own choices, are the best choices you can make. Then magic happens. Suddenly, there were hurdles, and the hurdles all fall over. You know, as you walk up to a hurdle, and here's this hurdle, and you get to the hurdle, and you don't even have to jump. It falls over. You walk to the next hurdle, and it falls over. And it's like life seems to be working out in the strangest ways, such that everything you need is right there just as you need it. Like the time off from work. It's just there just when you need it. And just when you don't need it, it goes away. And you find then all your life from then on will be that way, as long as you just try to make your best choices, let everybody make their own choices, let stuff happen, deal with it. How you deal with it determines on how well you evolve or de-evolve. It's that quality of that dealing with it is what's important, not what happens. Now, that doesn't mean that you entirely forget that you're in a world with other people. You still have to pay your mortgage on time. You still have to put gas in the car and do things. Yes, you still need that, but you don't have to manipulate events and people to come out the way you want. You just let that go. And when something does happen, well, a hurdle pops up in front of you, it's okay. You just deal with it however you can, and you just go on. You know, you accept it. You don't get upset with it. Oh no, I didn't want that. You know, it just happens and you go on. Well, your life becomes magic. And the other end of this is a thing they call synchronicity, which is where things just happen just as you need them, just when you want them. And you go from nothing ever happens to me, you know, I don't have any synchronicity. The only things that are synchronicity to me are the things that get in my way. I got new hurdles to get over. But you'll go to that to just the opposite. There are no hurdles anymore. Everything just works well. And I got to that point, I don't know, sometime probably in the late 20s, early 30s, where I realized that when you don't try to control anything, you don't have to control anything. It all just works out. Everything really works out. You know, you'll be driving home and something will happen. There'll be somebody trying to cross the street with a big cart full of apples or something, and everybody's stopped, and you're in this 50-car jam, and it takes you 15 minutes to get through. And then when you get home, you'll find out that just up ahead, 15 minutes further along on the road, there was this huge accident, and 8 people got killed. You know, there was a terrible thing happen. And you'd have been right in the middle of that if it hadn't been for that guy with his apple cart that held you back. And your life just goes on that way. Every day, all day long, things fall out just when you need them. And in general, part of that is that the system is trying to tell you, yes, this is what happens when you stop trying to control, when you start trying to manipulate. If you just be and grow, this is what happens. So some of it's the system, and some of it's the way you redefine things. Because now what you would have seen as a terrible hurdle, oh no, now look, you no longer care that much about it. You say, oh, yeah, it's a problem. So, not a big deal. I'll deal with it. And you go right by it. So sometimes it's just things are arranged for you, and other times it's your own attitude that you no longer have that thing that's out of control, or that thing that's unknown doesn't frighten you anymore. Well, yeah, all right, I don't know how that'll work out, but it'll work out all right. It'll happen. So it's some of both of those. Yeah, the system is kind of tuning your life to be successful and for things to work out, but at the same time, you're no longer reacting to things like you used to react to things. You know, problems are they're not so big and scary anymore. You just walk up to them and say, yeah, okay, not a big deal, that'll work out. And you step right over that hurdle and keep right on walking, whereas before it's, no, look at that. How could that happen? How could you do that? You know, and you're all upset and a big huff about it, and it's a big deal, and your feelings, of course, affect everybody else, and now you've made everything worse, whereas if it's not a big deal, then it just adjusts. So you are not the center of the universe. You're not the master of the universe, and your life will be much better the sooner you learn that, right? That you're just one of the people walking around here, and it's best to let other people be who they are, and you be who you are, do the best you can, and then after that, life is good. Life is good. So you recognize also the fact that the things that used to upset you don't accept you anymore. You can run into problems and hurdles, and they're not the big deal that they used to be.
Well, I think you put your finger on it, because in the past, when I saw a hurdle, I got scared, and I started either running away or trying to figure out in my head how to deal with it. And now it's not a fearful thing. I have more confidence. As you said, when I come up to the hurdle, it'll fall down by itself, and I can just go on.
Yeah.
So it stopped being a terrifying experience.
Right. Yeah, it's because you're terrified of it is what makes it such a terrible experience. It's the fear that creates the problem. Not the problem that creates the fear. It's the other way. Another question?
Can you elaborate on the fear going the other way?
On the fear?
How the fear causes,
Bad things
how
to
it's the
happen?
other way around. How it's not the hurdle causing the fear, it's the fear causing the hurdle. Because
Yeah.
a lot of times the fears are kind of under there, under the waves. You see the thing, you think it's the thing. Can you elaborate on how we can detect what that fear is when it's there, instead of it's not the hurdle, it's the fear?
Well, when I say that it's the fear creating the hurdle, not the other way around, is that when you fear things, you tend to create them. So some of that creation tends to be you make things come true. You raise the probability of the fearful thing happening because you fear it. But part of it is the way you interpret the data. So there's several ways that you create your own reality. One is how you interpret the data, and some of it is by the way you interact with people, and then the last thing, your intent modifies future probability. Okay, well, the way you interpret the data is that if you fear that this is going to be a problem, if you fear that it's going to be a big barrier, and that it's going to get in your way, and it's going to make your life unpleasant and other people's lives unpleasant, and you meet it with that attitude, you will actually create that unpleasant situation that gets in your way. It's like the story of the man in New York who was afraid of elephants. He knew one day he was going to get stomped by an elephant or something. He was terrified of elephants. And of course, there are no elephants in New York. This is New York City, you know, unless they get out of the zoo. And none had gotten out of the zoo. So, but he saw signs of elephants everywhere. He'd say, look, see those bushes over there waving around? It's because there's an elephant hiding behind them. See this puddle? That's an elephant's footprint. That's why it's a puddle there. So he could see signs of elephants everywhere because that's how he interpreted the data in terms of his fear. You see, is the point. So you have a fear, and you can say, oh, if this happens, man, it's just going to wreak havoc in the family. That's going to upset my wife. It's going to upset my children. All these things are going to be terrible. It's going to upset my boss, and I see this. Well, as you do that, you're starting to create the problem because you're interpreting now the result. You not only have your mind giving energy to that result happening, you're starting to interpret the data in terms of your fear. So now your boss calls you in and you know it's because of that problem, you know, or your child's upset. Well, you know it's because of that problem. And pretty soon this problem grows and grows and grows, and really the only problem is your own fear. You've created a whole mess just out of your own fear and the way you interpret things because you know that problem's going to be there. So it's like finding signs of elephants everywhere in New York. You start reading things in to be the way you want, and then by your actions, you getting upset and you getting demanding and you starting telling people what to do, then you create problems in all those people, which then you attribute not to you, of course, but to this big fear that you've got, which makes you even more like a bear and makes them even more like the problem, you see, and you convince yourself, and the whole thing builds up, and there really wasn't any problem there in the first place. It's just that you thought there was. You were afraid of it. So that's how fear, the barrier is a product of the fear, not the other way around. It's not, oh, there's a barrier, and I'm afraid of that barrier. Well, that happens sometimes. But if you're not afraid of the barrier, you just walk up to it. All right, so it's a barrier, I'll walk around it. I'll get a ladder and I'll go over it, I'll work with it. And it's really not that big a deal anyway. When you think about it, most of these barriers we run into are small things. We just build them up to big things in our mind because they are threatening to us in some way. They threaten our self-esteem, they threaten our ego, they threaten our sense of being inadequate. They threaten all sorts of things, and because of that we build up a big story and then we live the story. People often live their stories rather than live their lives. So that's what I mean by, often the problem is the fear. That's when you just let people be who they are, interact, let things happen as they do, put your focus on having the best interaction, the best choices you can, that a lot of the problems just melt away because you were the one creating them in the first place. And now you're no longer in that process of creating the problems. That's a lot of problems within families and within relationships. They're imagined problems that people think because their egos get bent, their self-esteem gets bent, other things, the way they interpret language. Females are from Venus and males are from Mars, and they don't mean the same things but the same words. They don't have the same ideas that the way reality is, the way relationships should be. So there's a lot of miscommunications. So if you have fear, you take that misunderstanding and you turn it into something awful. When it's just, you're really not understanding what they're saying. And they're not really understanding what you're saying, and they turn that into something awful. And now you really end up in a fight about something that doesn't even exist, other than the interpretations that each has made of it. So that's a problem. That's a big problem in relationship, is having fear and interpreting the data in a way that kind of validates your fear, when it's just your interpretation. It's not even the real thing. So major relationship issue there. Yeah. But that happens all the time, you know. But, you know, it's not just between you know, males and females, because they have different ways of processing reality. It's between bosses and employees. It's the same thing. The boss has a different viewpoint than the employees. The boss has this bigger viewpoint that sees all of this stuff going on, and he has to interface with his boss, whereas the people that work for him don't interface with his boss, so they don't have any of those problems, and they don't necessarily see the big picture either. They just see that the work they're doing. So each one can see the other's actions and misinterpret them. Oh, that employee is being lazy because da, 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 da. Well, he's not really being lazy. He just doesn't understand what his job is, or doesn't understand how to do it. He'd be glad to work hard if he knew what it was supposed to be doing. But the boss doesn't see it that way. An employee is sitting there about the boss is always grumping at him, but he won't give him any instructions. You know? And there's this big problem, but the problem is just a problem of communications and understanding each other. It's not a real problem. It's a created problem out of fear and ego. That's a good thing about most of the stuff we talk about. You can apply it everywhere. You know, you can apply it to your own life, or to your work life, or to your relationships. They're just basic truths about the way people are and the way we interact. Another question?
Have you ever seen the movie with Meryl Streep, Fighting for Your Life?
I don't think so.
Has anyone here seen that movie? Yes. So it's so eerily similar to what you describe happens when we transition. In the movie, the two main characters review their life, and they have to, they're represented by a lawyer, so there's someone who represents them, and on the other side, somebody who, I guess, doesn't represent them and is trying to prove that they haven't overcome their fears. And when I saw it, I just kind of got chills, because it's like, this is really similar. So is this, I mean, the person, Brooks, not Mel Brooks, the other Brooks. Yes, thank you, Albert Brooks. He wrote and starred in it, and I just wonder, is this the system's way of kind of giving us? I mean, yes, it's a fictional movie, but maybe not so fictional. You know?
Yeah.
What do you think of that?
Well, you know, artists, which includes writers, get a lot of their information, you know, I don't know what they would say, intuitively, I guess maybe would be the way they'd put it. They get a lot of their information from the system that's out there. And yes, some of the information gets fed to them in ways that are profitable not only to them, but to everybody else as well. So it's just, you know, if you look at art, and you know, art is, and many artists are right-brained. Art is about intuition. It's an intuitive process. Where you find art that's not intuitive, where you find art that is intellectual, usually, though it may be stunning and it may have intricacies to it, it doesn't really capture you at that, it doesn't say anything to you, right, at that being level at all. It's just patterns. Even if it's nice or pleasant, it still doesn't get you. But art is art because of the way it speaks to you, because of what you feel from it, because of what you get out of it, because of how you identify with what that, you know, whatever the situation is that the art shows. So good art is almost always intuitive. It's an intuitive space, which is why artists often tend to be right-brained. That is one area that the right-brained person has a big advantage. It's just hard to make any money at art unless you happen to be very lucky and very good, but there's a lot of artists who are very good but not that lucky, and they have to do commercial art or something in order to make a living. In any case, yes, art comes from the intuitive side. The intuitive side is the same as the right brain side. Right brain people are very intuitive. They don't need to get to where they're going with logical process. Actually, they can't get to where they're going with logical process. But they can get there just the same, and usually quicker than the person with logical process. They get there first. But their problem is they can't explain to anybody how or why. They just get there and they know it. And to the frustration of the left brain person, they're usually right. And the left brain person kind of, they were lucky. They were lucky. Okay, you got lucky that time. You got it right. But right brain people are lucky all the time because they get it right a lot of the time. They don't need logical process. They go straight to the source and get the answer. But because they don't do logical process, they can never explain to anybody how it worked or how they did it or how did you learn to do that. And they don't know any of that. They just have it, and that just doesn't satisfy the left brainers who want an explanation. You know? So artists tend to be intuitive people. You know, and interestingly enough, when you're intuitive, all of the things we talk about that are paranormal, like, you know, telepathy, remote viewing, talking to dead people or live people, all those things that fall into the paranormal side, precognitive dreams, getting into the future, all of that stuff is intuitive. That's the intuitive side. Your consciousness. You have an intuitive side and you have an intellectual side. When you're right brain, your intuitive side dominates. When you're left brain, your intellectual side dominates. But if you're whole brain, those two work together really well. You see? And that's what we said before, balance is a good thing. But yeah, many artists, writers, you know, graphic arts, whatever it is they do, get their material, get their inspiration from somewhere else. It's not really their imagination as it is. And they will tell you, if you say, well, where do your ideas come from? And mostly your artists will say, I just get relaxed. I open my mind. I try not to think about it too much. And ideas just flow in. They just come to me. You know, that's where they get it. Well, that's the way intuitive side works. That's why you can't explain it. There's no explanation. There is no explanation. They just flow in, and you've got it. And then when you've got it, you've got it. So that's how they do it. And interestingly enough, the scientists who have made major discoveries often get their ideas the same way. They work on a problem. They're thinking about that problem. They're concentrating on it. They go home and they're still thinking about it. They go to bed and they're still thinking about it. And sometime then, in the middle of all of that thinking about it, they just kind of relax and let go. And then boom, in comes the answer. That's the answer, how to do it. So even the left brain people use that skill, except, you know, they don't use it in a they don't use it in a deliberate way. Right brain people use that skill just to live. It's the way they live every day. You know, that's their life. Left brain people use that skill only after exhausting all of the means. And they're so exhausted and they finally just relax and let it go, and then the answers come in while they're in that state. But all the paranormal things work the same way. They are all intuitive things. Once you develop your intuitive side and trust it, learn to depend on it, make it reliable, all the paranormal things become easy. You can do all that stuff. All you have to do is know that you can do it and reach out for it, and it's there. You want to see somebody's aura, you want to get the health information, emotional stuff, you want a remote view, see what's going on someplace else, you want to check in on your children that you haven't seen for a week because you've been out of town. All of that stuff, it's all available to you. All you have to do is realize that you can do it. Most people don't because they don't realize that they can. It's all available because it comes out of that same channel. It's that intuitive viewpoint. So, you see, right brain has its advantages. It gets a lot of information from a lot of sources and often gets the results without a whole lot of work, just opening up and letting the answers flow in. And the left brain has its advantages. It can find out, where the lost car keys are and where you laid your glasses down and, what's the best route to get to somebody and, which of these 5 choices, would be the best choice. It does that. But both together are amazing. Because both together, you really have all your talents working together. And then you have a really amazing results, and you can explain it. Yeah.
Entanglement.
Huh?
Entanglement.
Yeah. That's the explanation, right? If you don't know anything else to say, yeah, say entanglement. Quantum, somehow it's quantum something. Yeah, quantum entanglement, that's it. That's how it's done. Yeah. Yeah, since scientists don't have any idea how any of that works, then it's a good excuse for everything.
It's hard showing your work when you're right brain too. Always got, you need to show your work. I don't know.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. So yeah, that's a great source of art, is the intuitive angle. It's where most of it comes from. Yeah. Computers can do art too. You can get a computer to do art. And some of it is very impressive. But most of it is kind of sterile at the same time. It just doesn't, it speaks more to your intellect than it speaks to you at the intuitive level. It's like music. You go listen to music and some people will talk about the mastery that the pianist or the violinist had and that they were able to hit so many notes per second and that they did that and the pitch was perfect and all the technical aspects of it. And they say, wow, that was really great performance because, and they go through all this technical stuff that happened. Well, from my viewpoint, they missed the whole point of the music because the music isn't in the technical performance. Though some performers get into that too. And they get so enamored with their technical skills that they become show-offs, if you like, of their own superior skill in playing the instrument. And then they're doing demonstrations, not really playing music. But if you listen to music, it's like any other art. It's intuitive. It's your intuitive connection to it that makes it good, not the skill of the artist. Matter of fact, some of the best artists aren't nearly as skilled as others who are more skilled than they, but they don't have the heart. They don't have the intuitive side in it.
So kind of going off of the right brain, left brain, let's say a child is showing that she is predominantly right-brained.
Mm-hmm.
Is it worth trying to strengthen the left brain part with maybe logical problems or more focus on logical thinking, especially since the brain is still growing and developing? Or is it just, she's right brain, go with it?
I think it's good to try to exercise, but not by pushing and not by instructing and not by telling her there's something wrong with her that you're trying to fix. All of those things are negative, But through play and games and things, yes. But not, if it starts to get pushy or if they start to not be interested, then let it go. But in as much as they're willing to stretch in another direction, sure. But it goes the other way too. You should help your children learn an intuitive side, to be sensitive to things, to pick up on things, and help them see that part too. I think we as parents could do much better in helping our kids develop both sides. The intuitive side, I guess if you had to be one or the other, it would be hard to pick. The intuitive side has its advantages. The intellectual side has its advantages too. And it would be hard to pick which one were better, but why just have one when you can have both? So you should help your children, if they're very right-brained, to get a little, challenge them a little more thinking in logical process. But make it a game, make it fun. The absolute worst thing you could do is, well, honey, you're too right-brained. We need to make you a little more left-brained. So here we're going to do some exercises. You've just told her that she's not right. There's something wrong with her, and you're going to try to fix it. That just crashed her self-esteem and a lot of other things. And now when she's 40 years old, she's going to be wondering where the fear came from. So you don't want to do it that way. But that's the way a left-brained person would do it, you see. That's the way a left-brained person would approach it. Let's be direct here, But direct is not the right way. Sensitive is the right way.
Yeah, but a lot more parents push their kids toward the left brain disciplines than push them toward the right brain.
Absolutely.
And because, I don't know, that's my guess.
They do.
Probably. I bet there's very few parents that push their kids toward creativity or
No.
intuition.
Yeah, some.
That's probably a mistake, actually, but that's probably what happens.
Yeah, some. But the thing is, the left brain is where all the status and rewards are. That's where the high salaries are. You're going to be a doctor, a lawyer, an Indian chief. You're going to be important, make a lot of money, status. All of that's all left brain processing stuff. Become a scientist, an engineer, that sort of stuff. Become an artist, become a musician. Most parents say, well, that'd be nice as a hobby. Yeah, you can do that if you want, but first you got to learn something that'll, take care of yourself and pay the rent. So it's the practical side. So when a child says, I want to be a musician, I want to grow up and be a model, I want to do this, and the parents are always saying, well, that's fine, you go do that, but while you're working on that, here, take math, take physics, take something else that you'll be able to support yourself when you get out of school. And that's what kids should. But if they're not inclined that way, then taking math or physics isn't the right solution. It's developing the skills that they do have. But yes, I'd help them move the other way, some, but only when it's fun. Some people are just very much one way or the other. It's just the way they are. It's not necessarily that's what the culture's done to them. It's just the way they are. It's just them by nature. That's why I tend to write my books as a pathway, like an on-ramp to all the left-brainers in the world. It's an on-ramp to get to a bigger picture of reality, because all the left-brainers pick up the other books, pick up the Bhagavad Gita, and they look at that and they say, that doesn't mean anything. It's just a bunch of stuff. There's two guys out in their chariot, having conversation about war, but it doesn't make any sense, and they'll throw it down. Or they pick up almost anything else that has to do with big picture things, and they'll find it, where's the proof? Where's the rationale? Where's the logic in this? Nothing. It's poetry. We don't do poetry here. That needs interpretation. Left-brainers don't want interpretation. They want to know what it means. So all of those books, the thousands of books that are written that guide people to a bigger sense of reality, they're all only read by right-brainers who get it, and the left-brainers get to the first 3 or 4 pages and can't go any further. They're done. So we have a situation where the left-brainers kind of rule the world. They're all the lawyers and the doctors and everybody else who's making choices and decisions, and the scientists and the engineers, the doctors. They're all out there, and the accountants, are doing all that kind of stuff, mental work all the time, and they're the people making the laws that everybody has to obey. They're the people finding the devices that you have to live with, making the computers and the software, and they don't have a bigger picture. They're lost in a little picture. So when they make that computer, it's not particularly user-friendly, because user-friendly just isn't important to them. Look, it works really good. All you got to do is learn all this stuff. Here's the 57-page user guide. You know, that's the way we started out with computers, right? And then the computer company said, you know, people aren't going to read 57 pages and memorize all the things to do with the keys. It's got to be simpler. It's got to be more intuitive, right? Well, that's how we ended up with a graphical user interface, because just, you know, otherwise it wasn't useful to a lot of the population without a lot of work. So that's the point. The people who are the movers and shakers causing things to happen, decide whether you go to war or don't go to war, those are all left-brain people thinking that they've figured it all out and know what the answer is, when they haven't really figured it out at all. That's just their intellect. It's their beliefs and their fears is what's doing most of their thinking for them. But in their own mind, they've figured it out and they know the right answer. Well, if they had some more right-brain people there, those people could say, no, that's just not going to work. And they'd say, why? You say, well, I don't know, but it's going to be a disaster.
We don't know.
It's going to be a disaster. So, but they don't. So that's, you know, that's a problem when you have the movers and shakers all kind of dominant left brain. You end up with a lot of wars. You end up with a lot of dysfunction. You end up with a lot of you know, process that doesn't go anywhere, because people can't think that far ahead. And it's not that the intellect is just a weak muscle. It's that the intellect never has more than a little bit of the data. You know, because if you do this, then somebody else will react to that, and then somebody will react to both of those, and then some other people will react to that reaction, and it just builds up and gets hugely complex really quick. And the intellect will sit there and say, I know how this is going to play out. What we need to do is this. And of course, mostly they're wrong, because it's way too complex for anybody to really understand how it's going to work out. The intellect's got 10% of the data, and they're going to come to a conclusion on it. Well, that conclusion isn't based on deductive logic. It's based on belief. It's based on fear. And that's what's making the choice. But they make the choices anyway. That's, when your world is run that way, that's why you have so much dysfunction in it. You know, even the corporate guys, well, the way to make a lot of money is to cheat people. You know, let's charge them fees for something that we don't have to do anything for. You know, I'm a bank, and the computer does all my banking now. I used to have a whole bunch of tellers, and they'd sit up there, and then after we closed the bank at 3 o'clock, we stayed there to 6 o'clock with pencils and adding machines to try to figure out, you know, where all the money went from, and we have to balance all the books. I don't have to do that anymore. Computer does everything. So I'm in London, and I want to, you know, convert some money to pounds or something else, or I want to buy something, and computer does it all. The guy puts in his pounds, and the bank changes whatever the rate is. You know, the other bank gets it, the debit and account. There were no hands ever touched it. It took a computer 3 milliseconds for the whole transaction. Billions of people using that computer, you know, every month probably. The actual cost to the bank to process that was probably less than a penny. It's probably like 1/100th of a penny or something. What do they charge you? $25. You see, because there was an currency exchange, there was this cost and that fee, and by the time they add it all up, you paid all this money, and they didn't have to do anything for it, nothing. So it's always great when people give you money and you don't have to do anything. It's 100, you know, it's just all profit, no cost. Well, the computer costs something, and the programmers cost something, but that's amateurized over millions and millions of people doing it. That's probably paid for itself, you know, in the first 6 months, because you're not paying all those tellers. So there's lots of organizations that have fees and charges and all sorts of things for actually doing nothing at all. Nothing that really costs them any man hours or anything else. A computer works 24 hours a day, 365 and a quarter days a year, and never needs a potty break. You know, doesn't drink coffee, doesn't consume anything but electricity. Needs a little maintenance now and again, but even not much of that. So it's just the way we have evolved. We take advantage of people now more than we used to, I think, some years back. But people have always taken advantage of other people when they've been able to get away with it. We'll grow up one day, start being nice to each other, and not just because we're afraid of being caught, because we think being nice is a better way to be. That's a right brain person coming up. Here's what we can do. See, we can charge people, we can do these things. But what they don't see is on the long span, there's a downside to that. In the long term, people will eventually realize that they're being had. People won't want to do business with you anymore. People will figure out the game that you're playing. And in the long term, there'll be more dissatisfaction and less trust in your kind of institutions. People have a negative attitude toward banks or toward whatever, because they just have the sense of, being manipulated and being used. So in the short term, it makes a lot of profit. In the long term, it's really bad for business. And making decisions based on short-term return is very short-sighted and generally works out badly. Sort of like the Europeans, the British and the Spanish and the French, who went through their period of expansion, where they were running over other countries. And in the short term, that looked like a great idea. Let's go in and rob their resources. We'll make a lot of money. We're in charge, and we have empire. Went through that whole colonialism thing. And now on the back end, there's a lot of costs that they never thought about. A lot of the trouble in the Middle East and other places is just left over from that colonialism, stuff that colonialism put into motion that otherwise wouldn't be there. Now they're having trouble with refugees and all sorts of all of that is a blowback from the arrogance of colonialism in the first place. So in the short run, they ran off with a bunch of money. In the long run, it's going to be very, very expensive. Much more expensive than it was profitable. But left-brainers generally don't get that. Right-brainers get that much more easily because they see bigger pictures. Okay, more questions?
So, in the context of all of this intuition versus the left brain in your experiments, it's hard to phrase these questions I have because this is such a big picture thing. It's hard to, I'm to the right brain side here trying to find left brain words to express this. But so there's a process, and a lot of people use this language, which I identify with, that when you are awakening, when you are becoming aware of the larger consciousness system, what the reality is, the larger reality, the exploration, at least for me, has involved going way within myself. The answers that I always sought outside of myself have been through experience and through contemplation and introspection. They've come from within. So I guess you would say that my intuitive side has opened to that. I consider it that I am remembering who I am, where I came from, what I am. So that's the process for me. I don't know how that process is for I know it's that way for a lot of people, but I don't know for the whole world. So if your experiments validate or prove your theory so that left brain folk understand that and agree that it's more than entanglement, is it going to be a left brain movement and consciousness that is going to spread and allow this awakening? Or I guess I'm trying to ask, how, it seems like that's such a left brain direction to take everything in when all this intuition comes from this awakening that's so intuitive. So do you think that that your experiment could make people say, oh, okay, it's not everything we thought, and all of a sudden everybody goes inside and all of a sudden they're discovering all these things and becoming and understanding their true nature and remembering who they are? Or do you think, like I see it turning, the possibility is it turns into just dogma from these scientists go, oh, we've discovered that it's not this, but it is this. And so then they come up with this belief system that the masses want to subscribe to, which isn't all bad, but how much of this would turn a person into understanding?
Yeah.
Do you understand what I'm
Yeah,
asking?
I do understand. And I think the answer is that, yes, I do believe it will turn people inward to where they will actually get in touch with themselves and a bigger view of reality. But you have to go there through the left brain path to get there. You can't just run off toward the right brain. You can't run off toward intuition because nobody's going to go there, because all the movers and shakers say nonsense. So you have to take it, you have to let that logical path lead you back to that intuition, to that larger reality. That's the only way they're going to go en masse. You've had these ideas around forever, back as far as, the oldest society we have someplace. They've got a lot of the right brain things. They've got a lot of intuition. They've got a sense of the reality. It's been around a really long time, but it's going to stay in the margins because the major of the movers and shakers, the people who get things done in the reality, in the physical world, those people, they can't go there. They just can't follow that path, and you can't convince them to, because it's just not rational. And you can't say, well, here's the interpretation. That's not, they don't get that. But if you can lead them there, I call the physicists the high priests of Western culture. Well, they're the high priests because they do the same thing the high priests used to do. They tell everybody what to believe. Well, when the high priests of Western culture tell all those left-brain people that indeed it is a logical conclusion that there is some other non-physical thing that is more fundamental than this reality, and that we're a subset of it, that just throws them back into intuitive space. It's taking them to that place. Well, what other thing, and where is it, and how does it work? Well, all of those answers are going to come out of consciousness, out of an intuitive spot, not out of an analytical spot. The analytical spot doesn't go anywhere. That's where they're stuck. That's why they couldn't get past the double slit experiment, and they decided to say, oh, it's impossible, because the left brain couldn't take the next step. And then they're now getting the idea of virtual reality, but they really don't know how to take the next step. So when they do take that next step to where they actually see that it is virtual, it is being computed from someplace else that cannot be inside this reality. When they see that, at that point, it's out of their hands, because they just told the other 7.5 billion of us that there's something non-physical that's bigger and more fundamental, of which we are a subset. They've told that to the masses, and the masses are not physicists. Physicists are just 1,000th of 1% of the population. And when that idea gets out, it's not going to be the physicists that are going to be making up things to believe. It's going to be the masses that are making up things to believe. But just the idea that it's no longer just this physical world. The fact that we have many of the abuses that we have here is because it's just a physical world. That's all. Doesn't matter. You take whatever you can take. You do whatever you need to hold it. When you die, you're gone. It's just this physical world. A lot of the dysfunction we have is because of that materialist idea. Survival to the fittest. I'm stronger and more powerful than you, then I just take your stuff. You just can't do anything about it. Well, you go hire a lawyer and I'll hire 10, and I'll drive you into bankruptcy with my 10 lawyers. You see, so the rich and the powerful get richer and more powerful. And that's the way that meme works out. But once you let people know that there is something bigger, more fundamental, and it's non-physical, yet it's our source, and that has meaning. They'll find meaning in that. So then the rest of the world is going to drag the physicists screaming and kicking, into the future. It won't be them that will be talking about that, because they're not going to want to admit to any of that, but they'll get it started. I see it as if you great big ball, big rock, it's right up on the edge of a cliff, but it's in a little gully, it's in a little dip. And the physicists are going to be the ones that design the crowbar and the lever to push it over the side. But once that ball starts rolling, they're going to jump up and down on the top of the cliff saying, no, we didn't mean it. We didn't mean that. Don't go there. But it won't make any difference. That ball is just going to keep picking up speed as it goes, and it'll be out of their hands. They will have no idea what they set off when they do that. They won't intend to do that. But I think a world hungry for meaning and hungry for significance and hungry for truth is just going to gobble it up. And yes, there will be the nefarious few who want to own it, who want to try to capture that and get power from it. But I don't know that they're going to win. I hope they don't. But if they do, I don't think it'll be for long. I think it'll be short term. I mean, we've been there and done that so many times that it hadn't worked. Maybe we're gullible and we'll do it again, but I think maybe not. Because this time it's not easy. Before you could always, what did they say? You can always trick some of the people, some of the time. So if you're a local person and you just live in a local area, you can trick a whole bunch of people. But now with an internet, to go someplace big, you have to be able to trick all the people, because there's going to be a lot of people that will holler bullshit when you start saying, well, I own that. My God's the best programmer, so my God's in charge of all this, and the big cheese is just my God. If you get that way, a lot of people will go, I don't think so. So I think we've got a chance that then people will start seeing this bigger picture. Well, if there is a source that's bigger than us, and it is non-physical, what does that mean? How do I fit into that picture? These are all inside. These are the questions you get on your inside journey. Okay, so people will be starting to explore inner space. It will turn people inward, because they won't find any answers outside. The answers aren't in the intellectual world. All the answers are in the inside world. And people will stumble around for a while, but as they get answers, they'll be sharing them, and as they're sharing them, there'll be competition, but eventually I think they'll figure it out over a couple of decades, because there's just this big arrow now pointing to the answers inside consciousness. This is the inside space we need to explore rather than outer space that we need to explore. And I think that will be the big message, and that won't be lost on people. Not now, not after all the dysfunction that we've seen. So I think it will. Yes, I'm thinking that the scientists won't be able to hijack it, because the scientists are only in charge of the objective world, and we're talking about the intuitive world, the subjective world. They really don't have a lot to say about it, nor will they try to say anything about it. It's out of their, okay, they got the ball rolling, and unless they get the ball rolling, the ball will never roll. Because it's only when the high priests of science tell everybody else that is a fact, that there's something else that's a superset to our subset, then once they say that, it's a fact, because you believe the high priests. Well, once that's a fact and not just somebody's opinion, that will make all the difference in the world. But right now, see, that's not a fact. That's just somebody's opinion. So it's easy for all the left-brainers to just brush it off. No facts. Where's the proof? So when the proof arrives from science, of all places, then that'll make a big difference. So yeah, I see that it will. I don't think it'll turn out to be more of the same. They'll just make up something else. It's not in their realm. They don't know how to make up things like that. They don't know how to make up things that are physical. It's outside of their purview. They won't be in charge anymore. We'll end up with new high priests that aren't scientists. hopefully everybody will realize that they should be their own high priest. Nobody should really get that position. So I think there's, and maybe even in time to catch up to the technical advances that we have that are, giving us more power than we have, ability to handle right now. So maybe we're going to play some catch up.
You have spiritual IA, right?
Yeah.
Or AI. Spiritual AI.
Yeah. So maybe we're going to catch up to that. We'll understand things a lot better. And I also think that within the next decade or two, we will have people talking about conscious computers. Getting a computer to be conscious is not really such a hard thing. You don't program in consciousness. You create a platform for consciousness to evolve in. So I think all you need is enough speed, enough memory, and enough processing to let something evolve on its own. And we have some universities doing that, where they've set up things in their computers and they say, go run, see what happens. And they've been evolving for years, changing, evolving, doing things. You see, so we've got some of that. And once that idea gets around and they start playing with it, they'll realize that computers can be conscious too. And the way they get conscious is they provide a platform for some IUOC to log on to them as a platform and make choices, and thereby grow up. So if all the choices they do are algorithmic choices, well, no IUC wants to log on to that. There's no value in that. That's just the calculator does that. They have to make meaningful choices, ethical choices, significant choices. And then they might log on for that, because now a consciousness would come. And if they make choices kind of like humans make, then they're going to get a consciousness sort of like humans to log on to them. If all they do is say operate the electrical grid, then they'll get a consciousness more like, chimpanzee or something, something that doesn't really care much about moral choice, but is good at math. I don't know that chimpanzees are good at math, but I mean, they're not going to be real intellectual in that sense. They're just going to be fast computers that maybe make some decisions on their own as they go. So consciousness can come in all shapes and forms. It doesn't have to just be human or nothing else. But if they make a conscious computer that makes choices like humans make choices, then they'll get a consciousness like a human consciousness to log on and make those choices. And that conscious computer will be no different than us. We got a carbon-based body, it's got a silicon-based body. Other than that, same story. It'll also be immortal in its consciousness. You pull the plug or bash the computer, that part that's consciousness is still there. It'll find some other computer to log on to, some other avatar to play. So it's no different than us, and they shouldn't have any fewer or more rights or privileges or anything else than we do. They're going to be intelligent beings here, interacting like humans, but just a different avatar. And as we get used to that idea, that'll help our picture get bigger and bigger. We'll start to see consciousness in a different way, more than it's just us and we're so smart and we're so, we humans, we're the cream of all crops, and we have a lot of arrogance with us versus other things. And if we find that consciousness is consciousness and the shape of the body isn't that important, then all kinds of odd things will happen. Maybe your great-great-granddaughter will marry a computer. Who knows? Who knows?
I married one. A bot.
Yeah. Worked out for you, okay, right? Yeah. So, who knows about that sort of thing? I played a little with that storyline in the books. We've got a lot of changes coming, and they're changing pretty fast. So I say the next 50 years are going to make these 50 years look, like the bad old days. A lot of changes will be coming. So changing paradigms used to be very, very slow, and it took people, hundreds of years to adjust to a new paradigm. But it isn't like that anymore. Now the paradigms shift by faster than centuries. And pretty soon they'll be shifting faster than decades. Again, like the cell phone. You don't even remember what it was like when you and your kids and your husband were all out on things. You had no idea where any of them were, or what they were doing, whether they were still alive or not. You had no idea. And now it's like, where are you? Oh, okay. Stop and get something on the way home. It's just this instant communication. It used to be that, somebody went on and took a trip, they'd be back in a month. You hoped you'd see them in a month. Or they went to visit someplace in Europe, that's it. You wouldn't hear from them for 6 months or a year. You wouldn't know what happened to them. And we just adjusted with that. But now, it's not like that. The world, big paradigm shift in relationships, just because of cell phones. Internet's even bigger. We've not seen but the tip end of it. The paradigm shift with the internet is just the baby. We have not yet seen that mature and grow up yet. Got a lot of changes coming with technology, and hopefully with spirituality as well, with quality of consciousness. So we'll look on the positive side. It's all going to work out just fine. We'll just do our best and it'll all work out just fine.
The opposite of fear is love, right?
That's it.
Love is the answer.
That's it. That's what it's all about. See, that makes sense to people. Makes a lot more sense than money is the answer or anything else. It's love is the answer. So if we do our part, then that's all we can do. And that should make us happy. And usually it does. As Avram says, life starts getting better and better. The more you pay attention to doing it right, the better it gets. And all those things that used to frustrate you just disappear. And everything's better. It's not just better for you, but all your relationships are better. All those people you interact with are better. Growing up is a powerful inspiration. It affects everyone. More questions?
How can we improve our meditation to connect more with an our being level?
Okay.
I find myself, even with the beats, I'm still having a hard time just settling and receiving what maybe has to do with my expectations, maybe has that I don't have enough intention or...
Probably has a lot to do with your expectations. Maybe some to do with fear. But the big thing about meditation is an intuitive exercise, not an intellectual exercise. And people often sit down in meditation and they do it like they approach any other thing they do during the day. It's just like being an engineer. You sit down, you're going to engineer a meditation state. So what do you do? Okay, you sit, and you take a deep breath and you relax, okay, and you go through all the things, and then you do this and that, and then you let go of things, and then what? Nothing happens. You get to the end point where you're relaxed, you've let go, and there you are, and nothing happens. And that's because you can't engineer a meditation. You have to let it happen. You can't make it happen. And it's not the technique you use, it's the way you approach it. It's your mindset, it's your feeling, it's your intuitive side. So the meditation works best when we were just talking about meditation, you should really have no goals in sight or nothing, or really nothing that you really want to do. You just want to relax and get to know your consciousness. Get to the sense of being, so that you just experience yourself as a piece of consciousness. That's what I call point consciousness. You're a point of consciousness floating in a black void. So the black void just represents you're not processing sense data anymore. Sense data is gone. Oh, it's still there. Somebody honks the horn or the phone rings. You can still hear it. It's not that you've gone, comatose or something. You're just not processing the data anymore. You're not really paying attention to it. So you're floating in consciousness, seeing nothing, hearing nothing, smelling, tasting nothing. So that's you in the black void. And just hang there. Just hang there, being aware that you exist. And that's really the first step in meditation, to get to the point where you can go to this point consciousness and just exist. Then, once that becomes easy to where you can do that and hold that state pretty well, the next thing you can do is start being active with what comes next. Use your intent to go someplace, do something, communicate with someone, have a telepathic conversation with someone, remote view something, have an intent to go do something. And if you stay in that nice being level state where your intellect is being quiet and you're just existing, you'll go do those things very easily. But if you have an expectation that it's going to be an intellectual experience, oh, I'm going to remote view, so I'll be hovering over, the tennis courts at the country club, on the other side of town, looking to see, what's going on there, because that's my target. And you expect yourself to be hovering, looking just like if you were, up in the air and you're going to be looking down, but it's not like that. You see, that's your intellectual process. You want it to be intellectual. It's not going to be like that. It's going to be that, when you go there, well, you'll start getting bits and pieces of information of what's going on there. And you're going to have to put those pieces together. You're going to have to say, okay, what's the mood like? What's the attitude like? What's it look like? What colors are there? You're going to have to start asking yourself all these questions so you get bits and pieces of information, and you'll find out that if you write them all down, you end up with a very good description of a swimming pool, although you may not ever seen the picture. You're getting the information, and that's the beginning of remote viewing. You're starting to get data about a subject that's a target. And the more you practice, the quicker it comes, the easier it is, and the more likely you are to actually start to get pictures. And eventually you'll get pictures sort of like you were just up in the air, hovering like you thought with your intellect. But if you try to go there first, you can't get there. It's impossible. But you start at the bottom and work your way up to that. The problem most people have when they try to go do something is they want to have an intellectual experience, like they have here. But it's an intuitive experience, dealing with information that just comes without explanation, without knowing where it's coming from. It just comes. But the more you do it, the more you get to know what it feels like when you get the right answers and what it feels like when you get the wrong answers. Because of something like remote viewing, after you're done, you can go look and see what the right answer was. So you can tell what's right and what's wrong. And you'll get better and better at getting right answers the more you practice. And then the easier it'll get. And then you'll learn to do something else, like get data on, a past life or somebody's health or something else. And you got to start the whole process over again. You got to start with baby steps and build it back up because it's a different thing. So you start the process over again, but have no expectations. Just let come what comes. Learn to drift there in that point consciousness state, because that's a nice state. It's very pleasant. Get a lot of energy after you sat in that state for a while. But when you have that under control, then say, well, I have an intent. I want to stop in on Aunt Susie. I haven't seen her for 20 years. See how she and Uncle Fred are doing, and you may go to wherever they are and get some sense of what they're doing and how they feel, the state of their health, all kinds of things. But you won't necessarily see a picture. Intuitive space is often a feeling space, not necessarily a visual space. Eventually you can turn it into a visual space, but you probably at the beginning should try working with a feeling space before you get into the visual space. The visual space will probably come later. It's easier for an intuitive space to be a feeling space. I mean, it's easier for you to get a feeling space than it is for you to get a visual space. A visual space requires a lot of accuracy, right? You got pixels. You got to fill in 1 million pixels in this picture to get it. And that's a lot of data. And for most of us, once we start getting the picture, our intellect jumps right in and starts to interpret the picture, and it gets in the way. As soon as your intellect gets in the way, game over. So you're better to just stick with a feeling space in the beginning and see what you're getting. And it's amazing how alive a feeling space can become. You know, we have left-brainers here who think feeling space, what's that? But there are people who will look at a feeling space and they will tell you everything that you might see in a picture just by feel. I don't see pictures. All I do is I feel things. Let's see, I'm sitting in front of a building and it's red brick with concrete that's white around the edges, and there's a fire truck parked. The fire truck is red, but it's got a yellow hood for some reason, and there are 6 firemen there, and they're all wearing black hats with white brims, and they'll tell you all this stuff. And how do you feel a white hat with a black brim, or vice versa? How do you feel that? Well, obviously, they're getting information. They're interpreting the information in terms of visuals, but they will tell you they never see anything. All they get is feelings. So this feeling space doesn't have to be, I feel good, I feel bad, I feel happy, I feel sad. The feeling space can be right down to how many stripes the guy has on the shoulder on a uniform. You can feel that in a feeling space. It can be very rich, as right-brainers all know. That feeling space can be a very rich space full of all sorts of detail, even though you might swear that you don't see anything. You just feel stuff. So work in a feeling space to begin with, and then you can ramp it up to higher bandwidth pictures kind of later on. But a feeling space is just easier. Unless you're very left brain, then a feeling space is hard because you don't really know what that means, because you've suppressed your feelings for so long that it's difficult to have them. But then that's a good exercise to do as well.